So the last solar cycle was the weakest in 200 years. And we were waiting for that as an expression of the beginning of the next grand minima. And this one appears to be as extreme as the Maunder minimum, potentially, which will mean a prolonged period of cold, crop loss, famine, and just hard times on Earth, because it shifts between drought and deluge. And this has to do with increased cosmic rays, nucleating clouds in regions that didn't have that many clouds before. And if you flood an area here, what happens is you remove all the moisture from the system, so another area becomes exceptionally dry. So we've got these extreme climate shifts during these grand minimas that make it impossible for the normal type of farming we do. And so it gets very bad.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mind the Shift. I am Anders Bolling. Today, I have two very special guests with whom I will be having a very interesting and fun conversation, I'm sure. It's Diamond and Leah from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project. Welcome to the show.
Thanks you for having us.
Wonderful.
Awesome to be here.
I managed to switch to gallery view, which was nice there. And now we've been putting off this meeting a few times here because I've been sick, but now finally, I think I probably sound a bit funny still, but I think we're going to be able to rock and roll today. I feel much better now. So I'm so happy that we could do this. And I know you a little bit, Diamond, since you helped me boost this channel by promoting my Robert Schoch episode, and thank you for that. By the way, Diamond, where does this nickname come from, Diamond? I mean, your name is David.
Yeah, it goes all the way back to high school, and I've been using some form of that nickname since I was about 15.
All right, I love it.
I used to, you know, David Lee Roth, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
From Van Halen. So I used to have wear all that kind of crazy stuff in the 80s.
Okay, good.
So they associated me with him.
So you get Diamond the Dave out of that.
Yes. And wonderful to get to know you also now, Leah.
Cool.
So let's start off with, this project that you're having here. The Oppenheimer Ranch Project. It's a ranch in up in the mountains in the southern parts of Colorado. What is this? What are the goals and the purpose for those people who don't know anything about you or what you're doing? The Oppenheimer Ranch Project. What is it?
Well, let me chime in first, and then Leah can back me up or correct me. On all of our websites, what we wrote about 10 years ago, we were brainstorming in her office at her house in Philadelphia. We were at this point kind of red-pilled. And so we were aware over a decade ago about the nature of government and the fact that there's revolving doors in these multinational corporations and that the crony capitalism was destroying the planet. Our thinking was a little polluted and it took time for us to develop it, but we knew we had to get out of major cities because smart cities were coming and potentially control mechanisms that we didn't want to have anything to do with. I had started work organizing with March Against Monsanto over a decade ago. And so we were exposing the corruption in the food stream, that the food we're eating is toxic and polluted. And 13 years ago, no one knew that. But now today, everyone is well aware of the glyphosate in their food and the food supply. And the fact that at the same time in the 90s, when all this was introduced into the food stream, diabetes, obesity, cancer, celiac disease, autism, all began to spike around 1994, and they're now off the charts. This isn't a mystery. It's literally the environment we live in and the food we consume. So based on all that, Leah had some ideas of homesteading, and I had some ideas. We started mind melding and creating this project, the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, that would be a project in sustainability and independence from the grid, independence from the system, and the fact that you can provide yourself, if possible, with your own food and protein and vegetables in a clean environment with no chemicals and literally survive and thrive no matter what happens. If the grid goes down, if the government locks you down, if a bomb hits, if a comet hits, no matter what happens, instead of us panicking and being like, what are we going to do? We just know what to do because we have it all on hand. So that's the basic premise. And it's been evolving now for about a decade.
Okay. Yeah, what do you say?
I think all of this is it's an exercise in sovereignty in a way, right? The food piece is a huge part of it because, what we're putting into our bodies, we'd like to be able to control that. We don't want to be stuck in the system with food that's toxic and poisonous. But, the whole March Against Monsanto venture also really shows how government is completely in bed with the corporations as well as the regulatory bodies, right? We have, especially in the United States, we have this revolving door where we have food industry people who then become regulators in the government. So there's really no objectivity in the regulation of our food. And we wanted to get away from that and have control. And really the only way to do that is to grow your own food. But it was bigger than that too, right? I mean, we were certainly concerned about the potential for financial collapse, which brings with it all kinds of chaos in the regular world, right? Like, so I had been prepping in my house in Philadelphia. I had tons of canned food in the basement. I was ready to, if needed, if crap hit the fan, so to speak, that I could sit there and be pretty comfortable, or if I could anticipate things quickly, get out of the city, right? Because in Philadelphia, even on a good day, you can't get out of the city quickly. So it's either you anticipate what's coming if some catastrophe happens, or you be prepared to shelter in place and leave when you can. I was completely prepared to do that, but we both knew that we needed to get out of the city in a big way. And I had been dreaming of homesteading for a long time. I had looked at land up in the Northeast United States, like places like Vermont and New Hampshire. My geologist partner here fortunately corrected that course because in the face of the potential for grand solar minimum, which I'm sure we'll get to in this interview, that's not a good place to be. It gets cold there quickly. In fact, we just saw that Mount Washington just had its lowest recorded temperature in history. What was that? Minus
107 degrees.
It was actually 108.4 was the lowest reading at the summit.
Yeah.
Minus Fahrenheit. Yeah.
Minus 108.4 F as
with
a wind
120 degree winds.
And the ambient temperature without the wind was minus 47, which destroyed the lowest ever recorded by like several degrees. It wasn't like a little record. It was what actually happened was the troposphere. The pressure was so low that the atmosphere pushed below the summit of Mount Washington, and the tip of Mount Washington, which is just 7,000 feet high, was almost in space. Oh, yeah. It was in the troposphere.
Yeah, that's dramatic.
Yeah. So in any case, with grand solar minimum on the way and all of that, Diamond redirected our geographical location. Thankfully, I think we're in a much better position where we are here. But overall, this has just been a process of getting out of the system, becoming as self-sustaining and sovereign as possible, about food, about our energy resources, about the land, and thankfully we're now in this valley where if it comes to it, we can work with our neighbors and trade food supplies and block off our road if we need to. So it's all been an exercise in that, in being able to sustain ourselves at the end of the day, and not be part of the system.
So what are you doing? You're cultivating things, you're growing things, you're also selling it, or what's the deal?
We are growing lots of food. We're in large part a seed farm. I mean, we give away huge amounts of seed. We don't actually sell a lot of product. Some, we have eggs that we sort of sell on a casual private basis. But largely we're growing food for ourselves and using that to trade it with our neighbors, stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's very low return in farming. So unless you need to farm for cash flow, you don't really need to have large production. We already grow more food than we can eat and give away. So if in any eventuality, we know how to do it, and we know how to expand into large scale if need be. We have multiple greenhouses. And one thing that we have been selling that's very lucrative if you're a farmer is honey. So if you want a very low input cash flow and you're doing some kind of permaculture or farming and you can get an apiary, you can make all the money you need in a single year with just 5 or 6 beehives. You can literally make $50,000 worth of honey with a small amount of bees and very little work. So there are ways to make money, but in our case, we have enough cash flow in the limited stuff we're doing that we can keep moving forward with the project.
All right.
And part of this...
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Part of this also, of course, is, being as sustainable as possible in our building as well, right? We're still working on a building at our ranch. And you can see in the background behind Diamond, there's a logo, an Oppenheimer Ranch Project logo. And right above it is a picture of an Earthship, which is actually what we were originally going to do.
Really?
Yeah. And we probably will still build an Earthship in the future, like a small one, kind of as an experiment and just to have options. But for a variety of reasons, we decided not to do that. And we ended up with, I ended up buying a piece of property that had a shell of a building on it already. And we are incorporating Earthship technology to some degree, like we use earth tubes and climate batteries for our greenhouses. And that will be part of our heat budget for the building. But so we're not throwing that concept out, but I think we came to the conclusion that an Earthship has its own problems that wasn't necessarily going to make life that much easier. And it is a lot harder to grow food in an Earthship than I think most people realize.
How big is it? How big is it?
How big is what?
The Earthship.
Oh, the Earthship doesn't exist. That's
yeah,
what
but
I'm saying.
I mean, the idea of it. How big would it be?
It can be as big as you like, really. I mean, you have to make it extremely long because of the way an Earthship is structured. There's limited depth from front to back because you need all of the sunlight. You need all of the sunlight coming in the front glass to hit the back wall of your Earthship, and that's what creates thermal mass and allows the Earthship to warm up. But it could be as long as you want.
Yeah, wherever you're living, like we're 40 degrees north. And so the angle of the sun is about 54 degrees in the winter. And if you take that low point and you shoot it back into a rectangle, there's only so much distance where it will hit the back wall. And it's usually about 40 feet or so, depending on how high the ceiling is. So you use that angle to determine how high the ceiling needs to be so that in the coldest month in winter, when the sun is it's blasting into the Earthship and heating the whole back wall.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about this. What you said about how food is produced today and how it's toxic and all that, and there are so many chemicals in what we eat and whatnot, and also in products in our environment. And you hear that a lot. I've heard that so many times. I've heard that for 10 years, 15 years, and I'm kind of I don't know. I know what you mean, and I think it's good to be critical and to look into things like that. But on the other hand, I'm also a sucker for, following trends and averages. And I look at, longevity, for instance, and health, the average level of health in the general population. I know there was a Swedish movie 10 years ago that was very much revered that was about all the toxins that are in our food and our environment that we don't even see, and it was called the Submission. The name of the film was The Submission, meaning that we submit, we acquiesce to this terrible reality of all these toxins. But then you look at, people are getting healthier all the time. They're living longer all the time. So what's the big problem? If you see what I mean, if you see my
what you're saying is true and not true. So life expectancy has increased over the last several decades, but that's due to modern medicine and the fact that people have more access to services. So the modern world, the people that have the internet, it's basically like less than 20% of the planet. So 80% of the people are still living in dirt and poverty. And people that live in the modern world don't get that very limited people have access to this type of technology, watch YouTube and have access to this increasing life expectancy. But the reality is that since the 1950s, all of the soil on Earth that we've been using has been depleted of micronutrients. So even the organic food that we're growing is extremely less nutrient dense than it used to be. So even when you try to source good food, it's not good food. So what we have in the last 20 years is supplements. So all these people have access to cheap supplements because without them, and almost everyone that's in the modern world is popping a multivitamin. If you didn't do that and you just ate organic food, you'd get sick because we literally have depleted the earth. And so now we have modern medicine that can keep you alive longer. People today, my mother, before she died, had about 30 pharmaceuticals she was taking. That's not healthy. And the world we have today, the modern world, is mentally ill, is over drugged. The amount of pharmaceuticals that people are taking is through the roof. So let's say it does let you live a little longer. Is there a quality of life involved with that? Now, more importantly, is that the actual life expectancy in the US actually dropped this year. So while some European countries definitely have healthier ingredients in the same processed food, I don't know if you know the difference. The processed food in Europe is 100 times more healthy than the processed food in America. Okay. Many of the ingredients we use here in America are banned in the world because they're carcinogenic, they're toxic, like Red 40. I could go on. But most of Europe has much smarter outlooks on their processed food and are keeping their citizens healthy. So there's a bigger picture, and it would take hours to actually unravel it.
Well, just take the example of GMO corn and GMO soybeans, right? Those two things are everywhere in our food supply. It is very difficult to avoid. Unless you have to buy organic to avoid them, no question. But you've got GMO corn that is literally itself producing Bt toxin and infecting the guts of all of the people that are eating it, which probably makes it harder to break down other nutrients as well. And then you've got GMO soy, so it's just covered in glyphosate. It's everywhere. There's so much glyphosate in the food supply. It's amazing. Even in the organic food, it still shows up. But then the other thing too is, it's been a couple of decades kind of that we've had GMO foods, but it hasn't even been that long yet. I don't think we've even seen the extent of the effect that's going to have on the population's health.
No, but I'm not saying that you're. I respect and admire your approach here, and that you really want to live healthy and all that. And you might be 100% right, and I'm not 100% right here, but I still have this, approach that I'm kind of skeptical to those who are over skeptical to what's going on.
Well, and then don't.
I had, for instance, my dear dad who passed away a few years ago. His second wife, she had this condition, or what she thought was a condition that she was allergic to electricity. That was a thing in the 90s. You remember that? It was very big.
No, actually, I don't. Interesting.
Yeah, but maybe it was a European thing. I don't know. In Sweden, at least, quite a few people actually claimed that they were allergic to and reacted to the increasing amount of electricity and magnetic fields that were in
EMF,
in the environment.
Right?
What?
Electromagnetic fields. That's
electromagnetic fields were increasing
okay.
because there were more and more computers and more electronic devices in society and in the environment, and thousands of people claimed that they had problems with this. So they were actually studying this, and they were. This had the mobile phone industry, for instance, forced them to check their phones for radiation and things like that. And my dad's second wife, who also passed away, she claimed that she had this, and I could see when I was at their home, I had my phone on and she didn't say anything, and I had my phone off, and she said, "Oh, could you please take away your phone?" It didn't make sense to me. And then also, since then there is so much more electricity and magnetic forces and electronic devices around that. We would have an epidemic of people being sick from this now, but we don't see it because this has gone down. The amount of people claiming that they have a problem with this has gone totally down. I don't hear about it anymore. So, that's just an example that sometimes, there are people who they're so afraid of the environment that they kind of suggest themselves they suggest themselves to get sick because they believe that this is dangerous. I'm sorry, I'm ranting here, but I think
no, it's okay. I have a perfect analogous example,
Yeah.
which kind of drives me a little crazy, right? There are tons of people in the US, and I don't know about Europe, who believe that they're gluten intolerant. And some of them might be. However, I mean, you have to break this down a little bit. There is actual celiac disease, right, which is fairly rare. The genetics of it are pretty widespread. Like, I have the genes for celiac disease. I don't have any symptoms. But that's pretty common, and only like 1% of those people actually develop celiac disease, where they literally can't break down micronutrients, and the cilia in their intestine is toast. But then you have people who have a wheat allergy, which is a different phenomena, but similar, can't eat wheat at all. And then you have this very amorphous group of people who say that they're gluten intolerant, that they struggle to digest wheat and gluten. And that may be true for some people, but I'm a little confused about it. And the commercial industry has really taken advantage of this. I mean, you'll see lotions that make the claim gluten-free. Well, you don't absorb gluten through your skin. So that's really silly. And now you've got all of these people running around thinking that they have to get the lotions that are gluten-free when it makes absolutely no difference. I've seen people in grocery stores, like very carefully, like picking through the gluten. Like it's almost like a mental disease. And I'm not saying that there is not such a thing as gluten intolerance, because to be honest with you, I really don't know. I suspect that it might be the case for some people and not for a lot of others. And it's almost like an hysteria.
But it becomes an identity. People identify with this problem. Like my the second wife of my dad, I think she identified with this, and she had some other problems as well. She had some, I mean, it's psychosomatic in a way, because she was very worried about our things in general. So I think that goes together. So anyway,
and sometimes when that happens too, I think people just attribute the wrong cause. Like, I have sometimes suspected that people who claim gluten intolerance, well, maybe what's actually happening is that they're having a reaction to the glyphosate that's on wheat.
Yeah.
Because it's in everything, right? And it really does damage your intestinal system. Yeah.
Okay, that was interesting. So let's go back to how it all started and talk a little bit about you and your original career, because you both have science careers behind you, don't you? I mean, you're formal scientists at some point.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, my background is actually in philosophy of science. So that was my undergraduate degree. And with that, I also studied physics. And so my
but you have a background in academia, at least.
Yeah. And then I did go on to do a grad program in biomedical writing, which I did not finish. But it was a very interesting program, right? It really showed me how much fraud there is in the scientific literature, as an example, and how often people lie with statistics, and you have to be very careful about what you read. Lots of scientists even will just read the abstracts of papers. The problem is that there are a lot of abstracts that don't actually reflect the conclusions of the paper. Very fraudulent, and there's a really big problem there, and I think that's only gotten worse in recent years.
Oh, it's a jungle.
Yeah, it really is a jungle. It's right, and then it's there's so many people that don't know how to read a scientific paper or don't even bother to do it, so it just kind of gets worse and worse from there. So I mean, from there, eventually I went on to do some science writing. I was working at an organization that is focused on science history and science policy. So I'm a little bit more on the fringes. I like that, though, because it has always given me an opportunity to look at all different fields of science. So in my last formal job in science history and policy, I was working on a book, editing a book that involved the writing of about, I can't remember now, it was like 100 other scientists. And so I'm literally editing each one of these essays. And in the process, I'm learning about some other realm of science that I don't know, which is great because it allows me to kind of express that science as like a layperson learning it for the first time, which makes it possible for me to explain to a layperson. So it was really nice to get all of that exposure to all of these different fields, and then have the opportunity to write about those things as well for somebody that may not be familiar. So that's sort of been my corner in the science realm.
Yeah, and what about you, Diamond? You're a geologist or
Correct.
paleoclimatologist, or what
Well,
is it?
my specialty as a geologist, I taught at university, so I got my undergraduate, and then I specialized in stratigraphy. And then as a grad student, you can choose different fields in geology. My specialty was stratigraphy and paleontology. And when you go into stratigraphy and paleontology, your expertise is in paleoclimate. So I was a field geologist. That's my specialty. I can go out and, well, actually, you could hand me a rock with no context, and I could probably tell you exactly where it came from. It blows people's minds.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah, and that's because I've seen enough rock and I know enough about the geology of the Earth that I can make a pretty good guess. But what's more important is that I was particularly good at taking very difficult concepts and explaining it to my students in a way that they could easily understand. So I think that's what makes my YouTube channel very appealing. I can take difficult scientific concepts, break it down easily, and people who've been struggling to understand something, finally they go, "Oh, I get it. I get it."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what's compelling about the channel. Let's talk a little bit about that then. Did you start that immediately when you moved up to Colorado, or was that some later invention?
It was on a whim. We had been here a few years, and a conspiracy theorist, a well-known person that had been doing alternative science, asked me to do a quick clip with him out front in this property by the river. So I did a quick clip, and he interviewed me about what I knew about the grand solar minimum, and I told him, and he put it up on YouTube, and the next day it had around 20,000 views, and within a week it had 50,000 views.
Yeah, but also the channel, we also started the channel to showcase what we're doing, right? Building this homestead in order to extract ourselves from the system. And of course, that generates a lot of interest as well.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that doing a video on how to grow a plant versus explaining someone why they might freeze to death gets a little bit different traction. So, so the direction of the channel quickly went from just practical homesteading stuff to more topical, the unraveling of the ruse is what I call it. Because if you're unaware, President Obama in 2012 passed something called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. Now, the Smith-Mundt Act, which was written up almost 100 years ago, prevented the use of propaganda in the media. But in 2012, a new version was rewritten by Obama and the administration to allow for propaganda to be used in all mainstream media for the first time ever. No one knew about it. It was not on front page news, but you can easily go find out. And what we have seen is the use of intelligence communities, the CIA, the FBI, and all part of this propaganda has infiltrated all media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they don't call it propaganda in the legal text, do they?
No, but
we call it fake news.
And what it does, essentially, it's very Machiavellian, right? Because it basically legalizes lying, and it protects those media companies from, let's say, being sued for lying.
Mm.
We've seen this. I mean, several media companies have been sued for lying, and in their testimony, they say, "No, this is an opinion."
Mm.
Right.
Even though we say it's fact, it's an opinion. You knew that, and they get away with it because of the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, well, we've seen a lot about that during the COVID pandemic here, and what's going on with all those epidemiologists who've been trying to protest against lockdowns and things like that, and mass vaccination, and they're just being silenced. And they're
to navigate.
There's a lawsuit now.
These waters, to navigate these waters for the last 8 years has been almost impossible with a monetized YouTube channel because of the rules changing. You could say this, you can't say that. Don't mention this because that's disinformation. No. But Leah and I did a whole series on the virus when it first showed up, we looked into all the peer-reviewed literature. We came to our own conclusions. All the conclusions we came to 3 years ago were blocked and silenced. And today, everything that we said then is true.
Well, it's amazing, right? I mean, you can literally read out a scientific paper about COVID. Let's say it's a paper about how masks don't work or something like that, showing the actual statistics and the data. And there's several of those, and you'll just be censored.
Yeah.
No, you can't say that. It's like, this is a scientific paper.
I know, it's like 1984 or something, because I mean, I had an episode blocked by YouTube because I interviewed this doctor who was critical to mass vaccination, and I mean, he didn't say anything that was unscientific. It's totally crazy.
Oh, and by the way, you might have to edit out what I just said.
Yeah.
I'm telling you too.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Probably
I think they have loosened it a little bit now when it comes to
very
COVID.
loose. And on theirs, it's very loose. I've said some stuff that would have been completely instantly blocked in the last week or so, and they just let it go. Yeah. As long as you don't focus on it for like an hour,
Right.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, that's how crazy it is, right? A while ago, I was doing a video. I was raising a bunch of chicks, and I had a video of all of these chicks, and I was talking about vaccination of chickens. And there's one particular vaccine for chickens that is a leaky vaccine, right? So you give it to a chick, that chick sheds the virus, and it gives it to other chicks that aren't vaccinated. So if you vaccinate any of these chicks for this disease, it's called Merrick's, you have to vaccinate them all. And I said something like, that reminds me of some other vaccine we were talking about.
Yeah.
And then I was going, oh man, I shouldn't have said that because the video might get censored now, which is just crazy. Like, why am I even thinking about this?
Yeah. It's crazy times actually, because and I think one of the biggest scandals is that they never talked about natural immunity. That was like a no-go zone. You should never mention natural immunity. They didn't do it in mainstream media. I mean, even science journalists, they didn't even mention it in articles in Swedish newspapers and also in American, of course, which is totally, I mean, baloney, because we've known this since the plague of Athens 2,500 years ago, that if you had the disease, you get natural immunity, and it's very robust. And there are so many studies showing that natural immunity from COVID-19 is robust. It's better than the vaccine. So it's just, I don't know.
Oh, how interesting. Are you talking about the Justinian plague?
I think it's called that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what a segue. Our radio show yesterday, we were talking about that topic at the end, and our next show is going to be on that period of time, which was several years of crop failure, famine, the darkening of the skies worldwide, and the final, straw in the back of the Roman Empire. And that was during the Justinian plague.
536 AD, the worst year in human history.
Oh, I actually think I was referring to something that happened in Athens before. I mean, it was BCE. But
no, okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Anyway, okay. Well, there was an event 500 BC that's also similar. So
yeah. Okay, let's talk about these big space and sun and celestial bodies things, like the grand solar minimum that you're talking so much about on the show on the channel, and that is one of the main themes that you're talking about. What we are approaching, or what we have actually already entered, as far as I understand, is the grand solar minimum. And I think laymen are perhaps to some extent aware that the sun has cycles, but then they are mainly aware probably of these small cycles that are 11 or 22 years. But this is something else. This is a bigger cycle. And what is it about? Can you tell the audience what this grand solar minimum is all about and what it's going to entail?
Well, pretty simple. If you look into all the information we have historically on the output of the sun, and the way you do that is by looking at the sunspot data. The sunspots tell a story. Now, you referred to the 11-year cycle. That is a half of a solar polar reversal. The full solar polar reversal cycle is called a Hale cycle, and it takes 22 years. And in that 22 years, north and south flip in 11 years, and 11 years later, it flips back. So the full solar polar reversal is a 22-year cycle. And in between, the half cycle is 11. And each cycle rises to a max and goes to a minimum. And at the max, they determine how many sunspots occur every so often. They give it a smooth number. And you can get a data set of sunspots that go all the way back to the 1700s. And then you can extrapolate a little further back than that, because people like Ben Franklin and others literally took hand notes on sunspots. So we can extrapolate back into the 1400s. And what you find is patterns. There seems to be a 100-year cycle of increasing and decreasing solar cycles, and then a bigger 200-year cycle. Now, this is, I'm just averaging. It's actually like 104 years or whatever it is. But there's an average 100-year maximum and minimum solar cycle, and then a bigger 200-year cycle. If we go back and look at the paleogeographic record, if we look at the proxy data of weather during the time, there's a direct correlation between low solar activity and the temperature. So the last time it was cold on Earth was referred to as the centennial minimum. It was a short minimum, and it occurred in the early 1900s for a couple solar cycles. They were very small, and it was very cold. If you go back to the 1800s, 100 years before that, there was a period called the Dalton minimum, where there were 3 solar cycles that were very, very low. And we have a very cold period for about 2 decades in the early 1800s that we refer to as the Dalton minimum. If you go back further than that, another 100 years, you're at 1700. Well, from 1300 to 1700 was a time period called the Little Ice Age, when continental glaciers grew and consumed entire villages. It's when the Renaissance occurred and the Enlightenment. So something is occurring in these cycles. When the sun goes quiet, the temperature goes cold. And we can also associate famines and droughts. There's extreme weather shifts during low solar activity. Now, we are in the lowest, the last 2 solar cycles are the weakest solar cycles in the last 200 years. They are exceeding the weakness of the centennial minimum, which is why we're seeing floods that are dating back to matching things in the early 1800s, because we're repeating the same exact type of cycles again now. And based on some of the work of Valentina Zarkova and other scientists that are trying to project this forward, they are suggesting, and is the same thing we've been suggesting since the beginning of cycle 24. We've entered the next grand solar minimum.
What is cycle 24? Is that the cycle that the sun has been in lately?
We are in solar cycle 25 now. So the last solar cycle was the weakest in 200 years. And we were waiting for that as an expression of the beginning of the next grand minima. And this one appears to be as extreme as the Maunder minimum, potentially, which will mean a prolonged period of cold, crop loss, famine, and just hard times on Earth, because it shifts between drought and deluge. And this has to do with increased cosmic rays, nucleating clouds in regions that didn't have that many clouds before. And if you flood an area here, what happens is you remove all the moisture from the system, so another area becomes exceptionally dry. So we've got these extreme climate shifts during these grand minimas that make it impossible for the normal type of farming we do. And so it gets very bad.
Yeah. And the Maunder minimum was around 1700. It's like 1680 to 1720 or something like that. And that what kind of temperature drop are we talking about there at that time?
It's not that extreme. And that's what gets people off guard. If you look at the paleogeographic reconstructions of the Maunder minimum, the most the temperature shifts is about 1.2 C.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a few degrees Fahrenheit on average in certain locations. It's not the whole globe. It's certain regions more affected than others. This has to do with weather patterns, not climate. So during these climate shifts, the weather pattern shifts because of the breakdown of the jet stream. It becomes loose. It becomes what is called meridional, where the jet stream starts making these huge loops up into the Arctic, down into the tropics. And then you have these extreme temperature fronts, like we call it a cold front, where on one side it's 90 degrees warmer than the other. And that's bad news. That's extreme lightning, that's extreme hail, tornadoes, and just a bad day.
Yeah, I think often people don't realize that, overall the global average temperature doesn't shift that much, but it is enough to change the growth of crops, to change insect populations, which then means that we have to shift and adapt. And one of the big problems here, right, is we have big agriculture growing so many of the crops. It's not localized or regionalized, and you can't adapt that quickly at all. But then, of course, as Diamond is pointing out, you also have all of these extremes. So, while it might be a global average temperature drop of only 1 degree C, but not only is that going to affect your crop production and your insects, but then you have the extremes on top of it.
And regionally, it might be 3 degrees, maybe, or 4.
Right. And you're going to see those extremes like Mount Washington getting down to minus 108 Fahrenheit, which is...
I think Professor Zarkova said that, according to her assessment, this upcoming here, or actually current grand solar minimum, began in 2020 and is going to last until 2053 or something. Is that correct?
I thought her entry date was like 2023, like this year, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, it was the half cycle of a cycle. I don't know why she picks it. It's arbitrary because you cannot determine the length of the grand minima until after the event.
Oh, yeah.
It has a starting and an ending, and you have to be away from it to be like, okay, it's here.
You can't see it when you're in the midst of it.
Right. Historically, it lasts between 4 solar cycles to 7. So between 44 and 80 years. That's the length of these grand minima in history.
Yeah. So what does all this mean for the whole climate discussion? I mean, we're talking about a drop 1.2 degrees C here, and in the climate discussion, they're talking about, this very big mainstream narrative about climate change. They're talking about we having the temperatures having increased by about 1.2 C since industrialization.
Since the coldest. That's incorrect. Since the coldest.
I know, you're right. Yeah, it's actually not until about 1980 you can talk about an extra add-on.
So they're a little disingenuous. It began as global warming, and then the shift occurred to climate change because they're well aware that this little bit of warming can be explained naturally. In fact, a large portion of scientists say that this is the natural climate variability. There's no evidence of anything catastrophic. They go back to the Younger Dryas event and they say, back here, it changed 18 C in 400 years. Yeah. That's a little different than what you're suggesting. We're all still here somehow. So therein is the problem. But Anders, it gets worse. The grand solar minimum is the least of our worries. We're also experiencing a magnetic excursion. And the magnetic field of Earth has been weakening since the turn of the 20th century. Since the early 1900s, the magnetic field has been weakening. We're now at a level that should be suggestive of a full-blown magnetic excursion because of the angle of the decrease. And if you look at the complete history of the last, let's say, 100,000 years of the field strength, we are entering the next excursion. And bad things happen on magnetic excursions, worse than simply it getting cold a degree. What happens during these excursions is more cosmic radiation rains in on Earth. And you have increased UVA and UVB. And in the last few years, there are several peer-reviewed papers that are associating these large mass extinctions in our past with these magnetic excursions. And a good example, the largest magnetic excursion in the last 100,000 years is the Lechamp. And we can pinpoint that to 41,500 years ago was the lowest field strength. This moment in geologic time corresponds with the extinction of multiple megafauna and Neanderthal, a hominid that lived on Earth. So at this magnetic excursion point, 41,005, we have a mass extinction of megafauna, and we have the elimination of a hominid, humans are megafauna, called Neanderthal. Now, that's not the most recent mass extinction is 12,900 years ago. Yeah. 12.8, 12.9. And that was much bigger than the Lechamp. Now, luckily, humans made it, but 60 to 65% of megafauna in the northern hemisphere,
especially in North America,
yeah,
it was bad for North America.
Well, and then to aggravate that too, that we're experiencing grand solar minimum at the same time, right? You have less solar activity, which means that Earth's magnetosphere is weak and getting weaker because it is strengthened by solar activity. And so if the sun has an outburst, we're particularly vulnerable. And here we are at a point in history where our whole civilization is dependent on an electrical grid that could easily go down in such a situation. So it's kind of multifold what's happening. The potential effects are many.
So how will the world and society change in the coming decades because of all this, do you think?
Well, the biggest effect and the biggest danger is in just a very short period of time, the next solar cycle. We've studied some peer-reviewed papers. There are certain things that come out of the sun called coronal mass ejections. If they're aimed at Earth, we can get a geomagnetic storm here. The Carrington event is several of these shot at Earth over a period of time where the worst geomagnetic storm in recent history occurred. Now, luckily, there were very few wires on Earth, but the ones that were there were charged with electricity. They lit things on fire. The telegraph operators could operate their telegraphs without being hooked up to batteries. So this is some of the induction happening on the planet. If that were to happen today, back to the Stone Age.
It's a civilization-ending event.
You have 8 billion people that are looking in their cell phones for answers, and there's no electricity. And so people will starve to death in mass because they don't know how to get clean water. That's the dumbest thing humans are going to do. They're going to drink dirty water. This kills off a huge portion of the population through dysentery in the very beginning stages of a grid down scenario. And we're going to know it's coming. With the technology we have, we'll see a giant sunspot on the sun that we're monitoring. It'll shoot an X flare that we estimate to be X40. We'll have a few 12 hours, maybe 18, until it hits, and that's it. Then there will be no more stores. There will be no more fuel. No one's going to work.
It's catastrophic on several levels. There's the practical level, right? All of that stuff that Diamond was just talking about. And then there's the psychological level. Like, he mentioned everybody looking into their little phone squares for answers. Well, there's a lot of people on this earth that really don't know how to function with that little rectangle, and it's going to be blank. And that's scary. I mean, there's a lot of people that do not have a clue how to be resourceful. And that might be the biggest threat of all, right? To other people, like people who are hungry and freaked out, they're very, very dangerous.
So how much of this is known in the mainstream science, or I mean, how much is known but they don't talk about it, or are they completely oblivious about this, or do quite a few scientists actually know what you're talking about, but they won't say it?
No, they do. I mean, tons of top scientists email me all the time. Thank you for what you're doing. I could never say this, because they'll be fired from their job if they mention it. People are like, "What are you talking about? You're out. You're crazy. You're a conspiracy theorist." But in practical terms, if you knew something like this was happening and unfolding, would you not pump up fear in the population of climate change and it's all our fault? So when these things start to unravel, the people blame themselves. All the while, the powers that be are digging underground, stealing trillions of dollars and saying, "Oh, we don't know where that money went." And so they're just playing dumb.
Yeah, like what about these politicians, top politicians, people like Obama, who have multi-million-dollar properties on the beachfront? Like, if global warming is such a huge threat and sea level is going to come up so much, then why have they invested their funds?
Yeah, I know, and they all fly to Davos.
Right, and they all fly to Davos in their private jets and all of that. But you, surf, must do something else. You must flagellate yourself. You must blame yourself. And I really think that's a huge part of the equation, the psychological element of people guilting themselves about almost everything.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's on purpose.
It's a lot easier to control a people that's scared.
Yes.
So, You just
Are
need
you
to have
familiar with the
you need to perpetuate the sense of urgency, the sense of imminent apocalypse all the time. And we had the COVID thing, and then when that subsided, you're back to climate change. And then there's something else, maybe there's a terrorist threat, and then you can focus on that. And then when that subsides, you have climate change back again. So climate change is very practical, but because it has so very long lead times, so you can always pick that up.
Yes, I mean, the fear element is a huge part of this. I often think about everything that happened after 9/11, especially here in the States, and there was just this fear that was created, and people going, oh, I have nothing to hide. I don't mind if you look at all my private information and all of this stuff. And the same thing is happening again with COVID, only it's on steroids. Because the 9/11 incident, it wasn't enough. It didn't provide, and it didn't inspire enough fear to fully control people. They didn't, but with COVID, I think that they've managed to do it, and it'll be another new threat soon, right? President Biden recently announced that they're going to end the COVID emergency in the United States on May 11th. It's like May 11th, here it is. It's the beginning of February. What's May 11th? And my answer to that is very simple. Oh, there's going to be some new public health emergency before May 11th, so they can declare another emergency.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
They've just set the schedule. That's all.
Well, I don't. I'm unaffected by all these. The things that they come out with, the leaders, the powers that be, because I mean, I can think for myself. And that leads me to a question to you, because I mean, you're wise people, and I think it's super interesting all that you're saying, and you have all these interesting ideas and knowledge, not the least. But you and I agree. I think you and I, Diamond, and you and I, Leah, also, I guess, that many doomsday prophecies have been wrong. Like, I mean, in the past, like the population bomb theory and mass starvation that was going to happen in the 70s. And all that.
Here's the difference, Anders, that we
just let me finish. And then now we have this climate apocalypse that we don't believe in, but now it's like you are suggesting that there is an apocalyptic time coming, just not the one that people think is going to come. So there is something. There is an apocalypse, but a different one.
Right. And the way we do predictions on the channel is by using past information. We're not predicting something that hasn't happened. I only ever predict something that happened in the past, and we're now sitting at the same flexure point, and I suggest it'll probably happen now. Yeah. And this is a very good segue to this very scary fact. During grand solar minimums, there is new peer-reviewed information coming out to suggest that the core and the mantle heat because of the increased cosmic rays. And what occurs during these times, which would be the next decade or so, are major volcanic events. The last VEI-7 on Earth, which darkened the skies for years and killed off huge amounts of the population, was the Tambora eruption in 1815, directly in the middle of the Dalton minimum. And there hasn't been a VEI-7 since. And if we go back in history, these VEI-7s and 8s are occurring on these cosmic ray flux periods. We're entering that next one. We haven't had a VEI-7 since 1815, and so we are due. And if a VEI-7 eruption or 8 occurs and the skies darken for 3 years, do you think that will affect the Earth?
It will, yeah. But I mean, we will probably survive as a species like we did in 1815, 1883, when Krakatoa erupted, and the Toba event and all these. I mean, but there will be problems. It will be messy. It will be problematic, of course. Yeah. So,
I mean, the civilization we know will no longer exist.
Maybe not. I'm calm here because, and maybe I'm just stupid, but I have a hard time imagining myself being a prepper. I guess you would define yourself as preppers, or would you? Yeah.
No, we are actually prepared, not scared. Well, so our mantra is proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. It's an old adage.
We're just not scared preppers. That's all. Yeah, we're actually pretty excited.
I think that I mean, it's not wrong to prepare. You're right, but I kind of have this philosophy that we'll cross that bridge when we get there, and it hasn't happened yet. And it's, I mean,
well,
It's
for some folks,
nothing is written in stone.
Right, but isn't it better to have peace of mind than not?
I don't know. I kind of love humanity, and I'm not afraid of dying.
No.
I believe that my life is not just in this physical body, and there are all kinds of layers to this, and all kinds of aspects you can put into this. What's the point of the whole thing? What's the point of me being here in the first place? Why was I born here? Why am I here?
For this interview.
But you see my point. There's philosophically there are so many layers to this, and I personally am not inclined to do all these kinds of material preparations for that. Even if you're 100% right, and I'm not discarding that. You could be 100% right, of course. That's why I'm interviewing you, because I think you're wise and interesting people. But I'm a different kind of person, and that's what makes life interesting, isn't it? Talking to people we have different angles to things, but we're very interested in many of the same things. That's for sure.
What you're saying, Anders, has lots of merit. There is certainly something to be said for, I'm just going to call it kind of living in the moment and going with the flow as things come. Like when things come, then you decide what to do. But then there's another element, I guess, when we're thinking about all of these possibilities, where if a catastrophe happens, it's just not going to be possible for us to prepare on the fly. And I think for us, I think that Diamond and I, and we've talked about this for a long time, we've talked about all of these different possibilities and what we're doing and why we're doing it. We've continued talking about it. And I think at the end of the day, we're kind of excited for a civilization collapse, I guess, because we see the system as being really screwed up to begin with. But it's also a desire to kind of be a part of what we'll call it the new world, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Being a part of whatever that is and rebuilding that. I think, I don't know, that's just the feeling that I have.
I'm with you there.
Gut instinct.
Yeah, I'm with you on that point, actually, because I also think it's going to be a different world, very different world in 50 years, 100 years from now. And I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but it's going to be different, and it's going to be messy. But
and hopefully we won't be eating fake meat, like fake salami made from celebrity tissue and all these other insane things that they're. The beauty is here, we live in meat country, and everything's cattle here. There's no farming of plants. They farm meat here. We're very few people that farm plants because it's one of the most difficult growing areas in the world, which is why ranching is big here.
Yeah.
But the section in the supermarket that has the fake meat, the Beyond Meat, it literally, none of it is ever purchased. They put it all out. It all withers there, and then they throw it away.
Okay.
So that's not doing real well out here.
Yeah. Well, I don't eat meat myself, so I wouldn't be bothered by that. But anyway.
Well, do you eat the fake meat?
No, I don't eat meat. I eat fish sometimes, but otherwise I'm a pescatarian, I guess. That's the term.
Yes, we were last night. We had all fish.
Yeah.
I think the other part of this too is that we've been very blessed to live in a time of stability on Earth. Things have been very stable and uniform and kind of normal. And like you look back in history and you see these Earth catastrophes happening again and on a cyclical basis. And I think it's pretty hard for most of us to even imagine that, because we just haven't lived through those times. And that philosophy that everything is kind of the same and normal, you see that permeating all of science. Like there's this disbelief that there can be catastrophic changes, which is funny because we also acknowledge ice ages at the same time, but we pretend like, oh, that can never happen again. The Earth is just stable and normal all the time.
Yeah, that I do. So we have been living in it. Sorry.
I think Diamond's point about, not being alarmist for the sake of being alarmist, but to base the predictions on what has actually happened in history, because there clearly does seem to be a cycle that repeats. It's not random and it's not a linear process. It's a cycle. I think that's a really important point.
Very good point and very good segue over to. Do we still have time? Do you have time to talk some more? Or
I do. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
perfect. Because I want to talk about the past also. Because I mean, we talked about the future, which is intuitively not so difficult to see that it's uncharted territory. But I mean, also even the past, our distant past, is surprisingly unknown territory. But you know more about it because you've been studying the subject and you've been looking and delving into this. And do you think that the sun dictated the fate of our ancestors and perhaps was responsible for the demise of an earlier advanced civilization that so many are talking about that might have perished during the so-called Younger Dryas? Was the sun the culprit, or what happened?
Well, in our studies and the show we've been working on, we've been looking over all the peer-reviewed literature on impacts and the Younger Dryas event, solar outbursts, any of the new science coming out. And there are breakthroughs after breakthroughs that have been happening in recent years. And the whole problem, Anders, that we can sum up that last conversation is that the earth sciences are still using uniformitarianism. This is a very old concept from the 1800s, where the only thing that's happening on Earth, the processes happening on Earth today, were the same in the past. Nothing has ever been different. So if we can't observe it occurring now, it probably didn't happen. Now, that's completely ludicrous because we have evidence of mass extinctions, impacts, the extinction of the dinosaurs. Those are just a few examples of catastrophes on Earth. If we look deeper into the subject of the sun, in the last decade, there have been several papers that come out to say that the sun has outburst super flares 100 or 1,000 times bigger than the Carrington event several times in the last 9,000 years. If any of those events, a Carrington times 1,000 happened today, the entire network, the electrical grid would light on fire. And so can you imagine the conflagration of the Earth? If every electronic thing blew up?
Let's just say 3 words about the Carrington event. It was back in 1859, I think. It was a CME, coronal mass ejection. And what
maybe
happened?
Several of them over a period of 12 hours. And it created a large geomagnetic storm that lasted almost 3 days. It was so intense that you could read the newspaper in Cuba at midnight by the glow of the sky.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's very limited accounts, but those accounts have been corroborated. Multiple accounts of telegraphs operating with, after they unhooked them from the battery, it was still operating. And this really, people had no idea what was going on. It's literally the birth of the modern understanding of the geomagnetic storm.
So what do you think about these theories about, like Leah was talking about here, that we should heed, I mean, what has happened in the past, and we've had, I mean, we've been blessed with a very calm period now of maybe 12,000 years or so, and that might change dramatically, and something dramatic probably happened during the Younger Dryas, which was 10,000. What is it now? 11,600 to 12,800 years ago. And do you think that there was an advanced or several advanced civilizations on Earth before that perished, that were wiped out during that Younger Dryas period?
Well, Leah can corroborate this.
Yeah, I think
anyone can do it.
Yeah, Leah.
We've got Gobekli Tepe. So what's happening? The moments after the end of this mass extinction, literally the day it ended, 11,500 years ago, we have people living in Anatolia that start erecting these amazing stone circles with T-pillars. And the work of Andrew Collins and other authors have unraveled the fact that what these T-pillars are representing are an advanced cosmology that these hunter-gatherers were well aware of. And they were carving massive 20-ton bas-relief pillars because they were hunter-gatherers and they lived in caves. And they were specifically to monitor the heavens. So they knew that these catastrophes occurred. They knew that it destroyed their civilization. And they were now creating a new encyclopedia of the information so that we would find it. And we just found it 11,500 years later, right before the next turning in the great year.
As it so happens, yeah.
It's so bizarre.
It's not like these folks living in Anatolia. It's not like they suddenly woke up one day and were able to make these amazing carvings and suddenly had all of this astrological knowledge. Like that didn't just happen overnight. Like they must have been building up this knowledge system for a long time. We did a show a few weeks ago about one particular pillar at Göbekli Tepe that Sweatman and another author whose last name I can barely pronounce, but it's something like Sitritkis, they were able to date this column, and they did it by looking at the columns. I'm sorry, the carvings on the column, and they were able to match the creatures on the column up to constellations in the sky. And then there's a circle. It's a little hard to talk about without looking at an image, but there's a circle that probably represents the sun in a specific location, and it seems to indicate where the sun, the zodiacal position of the sun at that time. And then there's some further context about that on the column. So it's literally marking a date. I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but it's like, 10, 9, 50, BC. Something like that, BC.
Yeah, which would be 12,950 years ago, which is the Younger Dryas event.
Yeah.
So they're making a specific note of this date. And it's like, okay, and you're using constellations to do that. So clearly something happened that they were noting at that date. I mean, they didn't just carve a column to note a date for no particular reason. So we believe that it happens to match up with some of the Younger Dryas events. We believe that that's what they're marking. So they didn't come to do this with all of this knowledge out of the blue. They already had the knowledge. So this was clearly already an advanced civilization with advanced astronomical knowledge. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and Anders, some of the warnings.
Yeah, now you're back.
Some of the warnings came as early as 16,000+ years ago. There is a shaft in Chauvet Cave called the Shaft Painting that you have to descend 50-foot vertical through a hole in the ground to get to where they painted this image in the cave, and it is a it's an image of constellations.
Where was that? Did you say?
Chauvet Cave, is that in France?
Oh, the Chauvet. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I was actually there last summer.
Yeah, this painting is depicting where everyone in consensus is now thinking this debris field came from, the Taurids. It's the Taurid meteor stream, and they were depicting the constellations where these dangerous bolides emanate from. So as early as 16,500 years ago, which could have been after an impact at 18, because we have flash frozen mammoths 18,000 years ago that were somehow emplaced by muck, and it appears to be an impact. So a thousand years later, they're painting where this dangerous spot in the sky is that destroys humanity. Can you imagine if everything was destroyed and there's just a few people left, and you're like, what happened?
Yeah. Restart.
So,
yeah, I mean,
to kind of answer your initial question about this, Anders, I mean, we believe that there was some kind of cometary interaction. It might have been an impact, it might have been an airburst, but something cometary we believe happened that caused people to note the location of where that comet was coming from, and perhaps in subsequent years what became the Taurid meteor stream. But there may have also been some kind of solar outburst at the same time or prior to this, somewhere in this time period. And we were just talking about this on our show yesterday. It's quite possible that these things happen at the same time because they're related. So, for example, you'll see sun diving comets. They'll dive into the sun, and then you'll see a solar outburst. Or you'll see a comet breaking up because of the tidal forces from the sun. So it's very possible that these things are happening at the same time. And I think we've kind of nailed down what exactly was happening at 12.9 was comet related. But prior to that, there's something else going on because there's a huge temperature spike that happens, and we don't know what caused that. So perhaps that was a solar outburst. Really don't know. Total speculation at the moment.
Fascinating. If there was a higher, an advanced civilization that was wiped out, where do you think that was geographically located?
All over the world. And
all over the world.
For that
Was it a
The reason for that,
true global civilization, you think?
it seems like it, because there are huge megalithic structures all over the world, the remains of them, that are unexplainable to us. So for just one example, in South America, at a site called Sacsayhuaman, there's a megalithic site with these enormous, like 80-ton blocks that are fit together so precisely you can't even get a piece of paper in the seams. Yeah. Like, how the heck did they do that? But then you find things like this all over the world. And then you find also that, so like the big blocks here would probably be the megalithic part of the structure. And then the smaller blocks.
Can you see that?
Yeah, stuff like this.
That's Sacsayhuaman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then the other thing you find these repeating themes, let's say in carvings around the world. So at Göbekli Tepe, you've got these T-pillars that have arms, like fingers, reaching across the stomach. And it's the exact same position that you find on the Moai at Easter Island. Yeah. And then you start seeing those. I think there's structures, carvings in Indonesia that show the same thing, and you start seeing these themes that are repeating around the world, and it's like, what's going on here?
Ooh, Anders, go back to that. Go back to that last picture, because there is some Robert Schoch-like evidence on the top of these rocks.
This one?
Yeah. So do you see the top rocks and those veins that are sticking out now?
Yeah.
Okay, these rocks have a hardness of between 7.5 and 8 on the Mohs hardness scale.
That's granite or andesite, yeah.
Yeah, and the type of rock weathering that would take it to go down 1 inch would take 20,000 years of rain. Wow. So the weathering pattern on these extremely hard rocks supports an age in tens of thousands of years based on the weathering.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone's really pointed that out, but these vertical lines and the horizontal lines, they're internal veins in the rock. And if these rocks were once smooth, have now been exposed due to weathering, which would take thousands and thousands.
Well, we don't know that, do we? I mean, they might not have been smooth from the beginning, but
no, but I'm assuming they were.
I'm also assuming, yeah. That's pretty interesting.
And it's not a terrible assumption in that particular image, right? Because the rocks with the veins are at the top, and the weathering is like in the same orientation. So, I mean, it's not absolutely clear. They still could have been there, but it is coincidental that you see the veins going the same direction at the top, where you're going to have water.
There's another one on the left where the weathering seems to go the other way.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. Yeah. Yes.
So,
but
hard to tell. But anyway,
a megalithic rock wall like this, you'll find this same thing at Easter Island.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have any picture from Easter Island or from. Okay. You mentioned also Göbekli Tepe. I could have, but these are some pictures from Peru, where I was traveling around in November and saw all these. This is Ollantaytambo. It's a magnificent place, and this wall here is so big and so huge, and you can see the Inca work. You can't see it here, but I mean, the Inca work beside it, it's just like, I mean, compared to this, it's just rubble. But
yes, well, you had a picture, you showed it, of the Inca rocks in there, and you see that again and again, right?
Sorry, this one, sorry,
right there, you
can see the Inca have filled in here because there was a gap, probably because of an earthquake or something, and they just filled it in. So
Brian Forster has done amazing work just showcasing all of this stuff around the world, and you'll see that the oldest stuff is extremely precise, and the more recent stuff is not at all.
I know. That's
we have literally regressed. We are less advanced than we once were.
Well, and the main thing that people don't talk about is why did they use this type of construction? They were so advanced, they were well aware that the Earth produced 9 magnitude earthquakes, that it got hit by comets, and only by building this way would their structures be impervious to the movement.
Good point.
So they were well aware of catastrophes on Earth. They were building the most earthquake resilient structures on the planet, and they still exist, 15, 20,000 years later, and they look like they were just built. I mean, that's how amazing these structures are.
It is. And
these remind me of those really straight walls. They remind me of Baalbek. Have you ever seen pictures of that?
Yeah. And I mean, those blocks are crazy, 130-ton blocks. Inexplicable.
Yeah.
So
totally
it's
copper chisels, baby.
Copper chisels. Right. Yeah. I think they say that the Romans chiseled out those blocks, but I mean, they didn't have it as either. I mean, no way. And this is from Cusco, city of Cusco.
Now, the interesting thing about Cusco is that these walls were recently exposed. One of the largest earthquakes back in the 80s cracked the main inner city apart, and they found these rocks underneath of a veneer. Yeah. And then the government made them clear off the veneer of all the buildings to expose the megaliths.
Yeah. And there's another one. I haven't got that picture right here, but where you can show the difference between the Inca work and those recently, as you say, recently exposed megalithic stones. But you can see here, you can't fit in a human hair in between here. There's no mortar, and every block is individual. It's incredible how they did that. I mean, we couldn't even do this today, could we? I mean,
no.
And why would you do it in this individual shaped way?
And look at those little protrusions that are sticking out. Those are clearly purposeful. Like, what are those for?
Yeah, it's a mystery. It's a mystery.
There's an interesting theory about rocks like this, walls like this, that the stones were actually created using a geopolymer, which I think is a really interesting idea. I mean, I have no way of verifying that at all, but it's a fascinating concept because it would explain the precision of how they're put together.
Yeah, and I heard one person saying that the protrusions are probably because they poured this geopolymer into llama skins, and then the llama skins were less. I mean, at some point at the bottom they were less sturdy, so there was these little protrusions. I don't know. That's just a theory, of course, but that's what he said. So. And then we have these very, very, very ancient and very strange, mysterious places that I visited. This is called Kenko, and it's a cave underneath a natural rock, and there is a zigzag labyrinth also through the rock, and it has a very ancient feel to it, like it's like 100,000 years old. It's I don't know. I can't really explain that. It's just a feeling when you're there. And this was, of course, revered by the Inca, but no way that they built it. No way.
They even admitted they didn't build these structures.
When the Spaniards asked them, they said, "No, we didn't build this. We found it and we just revered it." And this is a very strange structure, also, that the Spaniards tried to blow into pieces. Or actually the Peruvians, I think, because it was when they built the railway.
I think it's hilarious how that's the conquerors, generally speaking, tried to blow up the things that they really didn't understand. I think they were very intimidated by them, and perhaps rightly so.
Idolatry.
We don't know what it is, so we're going to blow it up.
Yeah, it's idolatry.
And that megalith there looks very similar to the carvings at Pumapunku, albeit different rock, but the right angles, the portals.
That's true.
It looks just like Pumapunku.
It is a half a chicana on the left side there.
Right, and there's even some areas in Anatolia that have the same architecture that they're dating 9,000, 10,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
So this is some type of global civilization that has a global type of architectural theme.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. There is, of course, a lot of talk about Atlantis, but maybe that was just the latest offshoot of this big global civilization that actually spanned the world.
Yeah, we've talked about the concept of Atlantis as kind of being the central hub for a global civilization.
Yeah.
Perhaps. I mean, it's just theory and speculation, but it's an interesting idea.
It is. Absolutely.
And we'll truly never know, because if in fact there was a global civilization 16,500 years ago at the last glacial maximum, and it was destroyed in a series of catastrophes that ended at 11.5, all of those cities would now be under 3 to 350 feet of water or more.
Yeah.
And this is the most difficult area to do archaeology. You can't really scuba dive at this depth. It's almost, it's financially impossible to get submarines and go do archaeology at 300 feet. So all of it is perfectly buried in the most difficult to get to spot, if in fact everyone lived on the coast.
Well, and then there's the added impediment of, let's say, like in India off the coast, there are tons of what look like they might be megalithic ruins underwater that are not that deep, but the government fights people on trying to go explore them. And it's like, why is that? Why do you not want people to know what's there, what's going on?
Some were exposed during the tsunami of 2004, I believe.
Yeah.
Because it retreated first. The water retreated, and then you could see some parts of buildings.
Yeah. Well, and then of course, you just have ideas like that which was introduced by Robert Schoch when he went to go look at the Sphinx, right? And he said the erosion pattern on here suggests that the Sphinx is much, much older than we've been saying.
Yeah.
So there we go again, another amazing structure that we don't even understand how it was built, and that shows the evidence that it's much older than what we've been saying.
So what can we learn from this? That this is going to happen again, and we better be prepared, right?
Sure. I mean, like I said earlier, the calm and stability that we have now isn't necessarily always the case.
No.
And there definitely seems to be a cyclical nature to all things on Earth. The Earth cycles, the sun cycles, the cycles of civilization. We've seen civilizations rise and fall again and again. And then when you start to look deeper at that, those collapses often coincide with a natural catastrophe of some kind. And we've even gone so far as to look at the yuga cycles in Vedic philosophy, which is basically like a 26,000 year cycle, and how the shifts in that cycle sometimes line up with civilization collapses and natural disasters and such. And so, I truly believe that the universe is cyclical, and that there's a spiritual element to that as well. It's not just a physical phenomena.
Wow.
And that we as a civilization change throughout that. We become more and less advanced. And this concept that we carry with us in Western civilizations, that we're always progressing in some linear fashion, is just not true at all. And maybe there's good reason for that. You kind of said this early in the show, Anders, that, why am I here? What is my purpose for being here? And I have always said that I am here to learn, evolve, and grow. Why else did I choose this incarnation? Why else would I be here? And I think the same is true for human civilization as well. And I think some of these catastrophes, basically, I don't mean to echo the words of the World Economic Forum, but they do provide some kind of reset, just in a different fashion, more of a spiritual fashion for humanity, and a more beneficial one.
Mm-hmm. Very super interesting, everything. And we've been talking for a long time. This has been fascinating. Now, Leah and Diamond, where can people go if they want to learn more about you and your work and your project?
Well, they can find us on our YouTube channels. That's the best place. We have two of our biggest channels, our Oppenheimer Ranch project and Magnetic Reversal News on YouTube. And you can go from there. We have all types of alternative sites where we could talk about things that get you banned, like a Rumble channel and Odyssey and BitChute and our Twitter page. If you want the most breaking news that I'm gonna go put up on a video, I put it up on Twitter first. So any records in weather or anything catastrophic like a volcanic eruption or earthquake goes up on Twitter before the nightly news. And then pretty much every day we have a wrap up of the most important things that happen on Earth in the last 24 hours. So please go check us out there.
Sure. We do also have a website, but I will qualify that website is extremely out of date.
Okay.
But it's kind of fun to look at because it sort of shows where we started and where we landed. So in that website, we're talking about how we're starting this alpine homestead and building an earthship. And obviously we didn't exactly do that. We are sort of in an alpine climate. It's more like high desert, and we do deal with quite a lot of snow here and all of that. But it's sort of fun to look at where we were and where we are now.
Yeah. Do you have a book in the pipeline somewhere?
No, we don't. I mean, we've discussed a number of books. I have been talking for several years about writing a primer about the Grand Southern Minimum, and I just
why
haven't
not?
gotten to it. Just too busy.
Should be done. Should be done. And you're the people who should do it.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing that everyone should come away with if they listen to this is there will be a large earthquake. There will be a VEI 7 eruption. There will be a comet that hits Earth. The question isn't if, it's when. And wouldn't you just like a little peace of mind, maybe to be prepared instead of scared? Because if those events happen in an instant and you don't have a backup power supply, if you don't have any food on hand, you're not going to have any peace of mind. But if you do have a closet full of food and a generator and something like that happens, that gives you a hedge to keep a cool head and to make it to the next step, whatever that may be.
Nice words, nice note to end on. Thank you both so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's been a pleasure. We love numbers.
Yeah, and to all of you listening, if you like this conversation and other videos and talks on this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And as from a couple of days ago, you can also become a patron. So Mind the Shift patron. So click on the Patreon link in the description box if you're on a cell phone, or in the banner if you're on a computer. Thank you all. Until next time. Bye-bye.